The night had fallen quiet across the plains. That kind of silence that only the desert knows, where the wind drags itself lazily over the dry grass, and every creak of an old wooden post sounds louder than thunder. Out there, under the wide hat of the sky, one lonely cowboy rode back to his ranch. He wasn't expecting much. A bowl of beans, maybe, a jug of water, and then a bed that was about as soft as a coffin lid. But it was his bed. Life in the West didn't deal in luxuries, the South. Man's name. Folks around town just called him Cooper, not because it was his given name. No. Out here, names were earned like scars. He had worked as a cooper, building barrels, before drifting into cattle work, and the nickname stuck. That's how it went in the West. The world decided what you were called, and you learned to answer to it. Cooper was tall, with shoulders bent from years in the saddle, his beard carrying the dust of 3 counties. He wasn't much for talking, wasn't much for smiling either. The cattle didn't need jokes, and silence was easier company than most men. That night, when he pushed the barn doors open, all he expected was the usual. The smell of hay, the sleepy grumble of his horse, the comfort of things exactly where he had left them. But life, especially life in the West, rarely lined up with expectations. Because what Cooper found inside the barn that night, well, it was the kind of thing you don't tell anyone straight out. You ease them into it, or else they think you've gone mad. Right there, on top of a heap of hay, was a woman. Not some rough drifter or half-starved outlaw, but a young woman, curled up like a worn-out cat, sleeping as if the world couldn't find her. Her hair was messy, her dress torn at the hem, and she was clutching tight to 2 bundles. At first, Cooper thought they were sacks of flour abandoned in her arms, but then one of the bundles moved and let out a tiny sound, half cry, half whimper. They weren't sacks of flour, they were babies, twins. Cooper took off his hat, scratched his head, and muttered low, "Well, I'll be damned, and I leave for half a day and my barn turns into a nursery." But that wasn't the strangest part. Perched on the woman's shoulder, no exaggeration here, was a chicken. Her chicken that looked him dead in the eye, as if daring him to take another step. It puffed out its feathers, balanced steady, and gave him the kind of stare you'd expect from a sheriff about to tell you to holster your gun. Cooper just froze. One boot stuck in the hay, his mouth hanging open like he'd forgotten how words worked. "Now hold on, what kind of parade marched into my barn today?" He rubbed his eyes, blinked hard, and looked again. The scene didn't vanish. The woman, the babies, the chicken, they were all still there, carved into reality. For a moment, he thought maybe the beans he ate at lunch were bad. Maybe this was all some dream brought on by spoiled meat. He even pinched his arm under the sleeve of his worn shirt. It hurt, which meant this was no dream. The horse behind him let out a sharp snort, almost like laughter. Cooper shot the animal a look. "Don't you start, Clyde. I ain't the crazy one here." The chicken shifted its claws against the woman's shoulder and tilted its head at him, suspicious. Cooper raised both hands in surrender. "Easy now, Sheriff. I ain't here to steal your citizens." Still leaning on the doorframe, he studied the trio, or quartet, depending on whether the chicken counted as family. The twins were quiet for now, their cheeks round and rosy in the lantern light. The woman's breathing was heavy, the kind of sleep that only comes when someone's been running from more than just exhaustion. Cooper could have woken her right then, could have marched her out and demanded to know what she thought she was doing trespassing on his land. But he didn't. Something about the whole scene pinned him in place. Maybe it was the babies, innocent and peaceful in the middle of a life that was anything but. Maybe it was the chicken, whose eyes held more judgment than half the preachers he'd ever met. Or maybe it was the rarest thing of all in the West, a story he didn't already know the ending to. So he just stood there, watching, listening to the quiet, waiting. Because deep down, though he wouldn't admit it to a soul, Cooper was curious, and curiosity out in the West was the kind of trouble you could never quite walk away from. The barn was still heavy with silence when it happened. One of the twins stirred first, a small whimper cutting through the dusty air. Then another, tiny cries, fragile but insistent, echoing against the wooden walls. The woman shifted, eyes blinking, open, her body tightening in a rush of panic the moment she realized she was no longer alone. She saw him. That broad figure leaning against a post, arms crossed, hat pulled low, staring like some judgmental statue carved out of prairie dust. In a single heartbeat, her hands pulled the twins closer to her chest, her body curling over them like a shield. Her breath came sharp and shallow, her eyes wild, and the chicken, oh the chicken, erupted in outrage, flapping its wings and letting out a furious cluck that sounded to Cooper's ears more like an accusation than a warning. All right, Cooper muttered, raising both palms as though he were facing down an outlaw with a cocked pistol. Ain't no need for feathers flying. I ain't here to hurt nobody. The woman didn't relax, her back pressed tighter against the hay, her gaze darting between him and the open barn doors. She looked like a cornered animal torn between bolting and fighting. Where am I? Her voice cracked, raspy from sleep, thick with fear. My barn, Cooper answered simply. He never was one for wasted words. She blinked, clearly trying to piece together the situation. Her grip on the babies tightened. The chicken strutted a few inches along her arm, like a deputy taking position in front of its sheriff. Don't come closer, she hissed. Cooper didn't move. He just sighed, rubbed the back of his neck, and spoke as gently as a man who'd never been accused of gentleness could. Ma'am, if I was going to cause trouble, I reckon I'd have done it already. Been standing here a good 5 minutes watching you snore loud enough to scare coyotes. Her eyes widened. I don't snore. From the rafters above, an owl hooted. As if to disagree, Cooper smirked. Well, something in here does. Maybe it's the chicken. You three fight that out amongst yourselves. For the first time the tension cracked, just a hair. The woman's lips twitched, caught between a scowl and a laugh she didn't want to let escape, but she buried it quick, whispering to the babies, instead rocking them gently as if to calm herself as much as them. Cooper tilted his head, studied her. She wasn't some outlaw. Wasn't dressed like one, at least. She had the worn, road-weary look of someone who'd walked farther than her. Shoes could take her. Dirt smudged her face, but beneath it there was youth. Not more than 20, maybe. And those twins, their faces were clean, kissed soft, loved in spite of whatever hard road had brought them here. Look, Cooper said at last, his voice slow. Steady, careful, like a man approaching a skittish horse. I ain't asking your life story. Not yet. But it's late, and this barn don't take kindly to strangers who panic and scream at every shadow. So how about we settle on introductions before the rooster here pecks my eyes out? The chicken clucked again, loud and offended, as if it fully understood him. The woman hesitated. She swallowed, shifted, and finally muttered, My name's Eliza. Eliza, Cooper repeated, rolling the sound in his mouth. He nodded once, slow. All right then. That there's progress. Name's Cooper. And them too. He tilted his chin toward the twins. She hesitated again, then whispered, Daniel. Sarah. Cooper tipped his hat slightly. Well, Daniel and Sarah picked a mighty odd hotel for the night. Her glare sharpened. We didn't mean to intrude. We needed shelter. Just one night. I'll be gone by morning. Cooper studied her in silence. His eyes weren't cruel, but they were sharp, like a knife weighing whether the cut was worth making. Then at last he chuckled low in his chest. One night, huh? Lady, I've seen squatters say the same and end up digging roots deeper than mesquite. But fine, you can stay, just one condition. Her brows knit tight. Condition? He leaned off the post, took a step closer, and spoke in that dry, flat tone only a cowboy could carry without smiling. Stay. If you don't snore. The barn went. Quiet again. Even the twins stopped fussing as if waiting for her reply. Eliza stared at him, caught between offense and disbelief. Finally, she let out a laugh she couldn't hold back. It was quick, sharp, and gone almost as soon as it came, but it was enough to change the air. For the first time since waking, she wasn't just a stranger hiding in his hay. She was something else, something Cooper hadn't yet decided on, and though he'd never admit it out loud, part of him already wanted to know what tomorrow morning would look like with this peculiar company in his barn. The morning sun spilled through the cracks of the barn like golden knives, cutting strips of light across the hay. The rooster outside screamed his lungs out, as if the whole county needed reminding that dawn had arrived. Cooper, still half asleep, shuffled across the yard, boots dragging, hat tilted low. He'd half hoped the sight from last night had been a dream. Maybe he'd walk in and find only Clyde the horse, chewing hay and staring dumb as always. But when he pushed the barn doors open, reality hit him square in the face. There she was. Eliza, hair sticking out like tumbleweed after a storm, dress wrinkled, eyes heavy but determined. She sat on the ground, cradling one baby against her chest, while the other squirmed on a blanket. The chickens strutted in front of them like it was drilling troops for battle. "Lord help me," Cooper muttered. They multiplied overnight. Eliza's head snapped up, eyes sharp as knives. "We didn't multiply." "Sure feels like it," Cooper said, stepping inside. He crouched near the twins, peering down like he was examining alien creatures. "So which one's the loud one? Or is that a team effort?" "They both cry," she answered flatly. "Figures," he said, tipping his hat. "They're already practicing for life out here. Misery loves company." One of the twins let out a squeal, kicking tiny legs. Cooper jerked back. "What's that sound? He broke something?" Eliza rolled her eyes. "That's a laugh." "You call that a laugh? Sounds more like a coyote stepped on a nail." The baby squealed again, louder. Cooper stood, brushing off hay as if the noise might stick to him. By mid-morning, the barn sounded less like a peaceful shelter and more like a carnival gone wrong. The twins alternated between shrieking and giggling. The chicken clucked in outrage at every movement, and Eliza muttered under her breath while trying to hush them all. Cooper finally marched to his house, came back with a pot of beans, a half loaf of bread and 2 tin mugs of water. He set it down in front of her like a sheriff slamming down evidence. "Eat," he ordered. Eliza didn't argue. She tore into the bread like a wolf, beans dripping down her fingers. "You eat like a ranch." "Hand after 3 weeks driving cattle," Cooper said, leaning on the stall. "Maybe I'm hungrier than one," she shot back, mouth full. He smirked. "Fair enough." The twins, smelling food, stretched their little arms toward the pot. Eliza waved them off. "Not for you. Yet." "What do they eat then?" Cooper asked, genuinely baffled. "They're still babies," Eliza said, "so they just drink forever?" "Not forever. Just long enough to make me wish for forever." Cooper chuckled, shaking his head. "Babies sure sound like a bad investment. Twice the noise, half the work, no profit." Eliza glared. "They're worth everything." Something in her tone stopped him. For a moment the jokes fell away, replaced by the quiet weight of her words. Cooper nodded once, slow. "All right then, guess you're richer than me." Later, when the twins wouldn't stop fussing, Eliza tried humming a lullaby. Didn't work. She tried rocking them both at once, swaying until her back ached. Nothing. Finally, Cooper stomped out, returned with his old harmonica, and sat down on a stool. "This is ridiculous," Eliza muttered. "Maybe," Cooper said, lifting the harmonica. "But desperate times, desperate measures." He played. The notes were rough, rusty, but they filled the barn with a kind of warmth words couldn't. To Eliza's shock, both babies froze. Daniel blinked, Sarah stared, and then silence. For the first time that day, silence. Eliza's jaw dropped. "What kind of magic is that?" "Just noise with purpose," Cooper muttered between notes. "Don't spread it around. Folks start calling me a babysitter. I'll never live it down." The twins cooed softly, eyes wide. Eliza just stared at him, amazed. For a man who claimed he didn't talk much, he sure knew how to calm a storm without words. The peace didn't last. Clyde the horse poked his head inside, sniffing around for food. The twins erupted in delighted giggles, tiny hands waving. Eliza laughed too, the sound light and unexpected. Cooper opened his mouth to say something, but then the chicken noticed. It puffed up, flapped its wings, and launched at Clyde like a cannonball. The horse reared, nearly knocking the rafters down, while Cooper doubled over laughing. "Sheriff don't tolerate intruders," he wheezed. Eliza clutched her babies, caught between horror and hysterics. The twins squealed with laughter, clapping their tiny hands like it was the greatest show they'd ever seen. The chicken strutted back proudly, chest out, as if it had saved the barn from certain doom. "Feathered lawman," Cooper muttered, wiping tears from his eyes. "Keeps better order than half the deputies I ever met." The rest of the day turned into a series of small disasters. When Eliza tried to wash the twins' clothes, she hung them on the fence, only for Clyde to chew 2 of the tiny shirts to ribbons. Cooper nearly choked laughing. Guess he's tired of wearing the same old horse outfit, wants a change of style. When she attempted to help cook supper, she knocked over a pot of boiling water. The chicken ran through it, squawking like a kettle. Whistle, feathers steaming. Cooper had to chase it around the yard with a bucket, while Eliza laughed so hard she nearly dropped Sarah. By nightfall, the ranch looked less like a working spread and more like a battlefield. Hay scattered everywhere, baby clothes missing, one furious horse, one traumatized chicken, and two babies who thought it was all the funniest thing in the world. And through it all, Cooper found himself grinning more than he had in years. He stood outside the barn that evening, arms crossed, staring at the horizon burning red. Inside, Eliza rocked the twins while humming softly. The chicken perched on the stall like a tired sheriff after a long day. Cooper exhaled slow. He told himself again it was temporary. Tomorrow she'd be gone. Tomorrow the barn would be quiet. Again. But part of him already knew the truth. The silence he used to love suddenly felt emptier than the racket inside, and as much as he hated to admit it, this little circus, it was starting to feel like home. Life on Eli's ranch had always been steady as a metronome. The sun rose, the cattle bawled, the coffee boiled, and silence filled the gaps in between. Nothing unexpected ever dared to happen out here in the middle of nowhere. But since she showed up with those twins and that blasted chicken, silence had become a legend, a ghost that used to haunt his mornings, but now was long gone. The first morning told Eli everything he needed to know about how things would change. He woke before dawn, like always, expecting the gentle hum of quiet. Instead, he heard it. Two shrill cries overlapping in perfect dissonance, like a fiddle and a trumpet fighting for dominance. He shoved his hat on, muttering, and pushed open the barn door. What he saw nearly made him laugh out loud, though he held it back with the discipline of a man who prided himself on being unshakable. There she was, rocking one twin on her knee, patting the other with her elbow, and humming some tune that sounded halfway between a lullaby and a groan of despair. The chicken, meanwhile, had leapt onto a hay bale, pecking insistently at her dress as if demanding breakfast, clucking louder with each second. "Sounds like a full orchestra in here," Eli said, leaning against the doorway. She shot him a tired look, hair all undone, eyes shadowed but still shining with defiance. "They don't like mornings," Eli snorted. "Then they picked the wrong ranch. Out here, mornings are half the day." The twins didn't care for jokes. One screeched louder, setting off the other like an echo. The chicken clucked furiously, as though offended at being left out of the performance. For the first time in a long while, Eli chuckled, not a dry, polite laugh, but a real one that escaped before he could hide it. He stepped inside, reached for the coffee pot perched on a shelf, and poured her a cup. "Here," he said, handing it over. "Might not stop the crying, but it'll keep you from falling over." She took it like a lifeline, sipping with both hands, mumbling a thank you through the steam. Eli noticed then. Her shoulders, though, tired, carried something softer than fear now. Maybe trust. Maybe just the relief of not being told to leave. The days stretched into weeks, and each one carried its own brand of absurdity. The twins quickly decided Eli's ranch was theirs to conquer. No fence post, saddle, or bucket was safe from tiny hands grabbing, tugging, or spilling. More than once, Eli found himself chasing after a crawling baby, headed straight for a horse's hooves, muttering curses under his breath while secretly thankful his boots were quicker than most men's. Then there was the chicken. That bird developed an unholy attachment to Eli. Every morning it followed him, pecking at his spurs, clucking whenever he turned his back, sometimes even hopping onto his shoulder as if it had claimed him as its personal perch. Eli, who had once believed himself the picture of a dignified cowboy, now spent half his days shoeing a chicken, while two babies squealed with delight at the sight. At night, when the chores were done, and the stars stretched endless above the plains, the woman would sit by the fire with the twins nestled against her. Eli often found himself sitting nearby, pretending to whittle or roll a cigarette, but really listening. She told little stories, sometimes nonsense, sometimes bits of her past, and Eli would catch himself leaning in, curious despite himself. One evening, after the twins had finally fallen asleep, she looked over at him and smirked. You don't say much, do you? Eli shrugged. Ain't much worth saying, she raised a brow. Yet here you are sitting close enough to hear every word I say. That's something. He had no answer to that, so he tipped his hat lower and poked at the fire, pretending the sparks needed his full attention. But inside something stirred, something he hadn't felt since long before loneliness had settled on him like dust. The ranch was no longer just Eli's. It was louder, messier, and downright unpredictable. And though he'd never admit it out loud, every time he heard the twins laugh or even cry, or every time that ridiculous chicken strutted across the yard, Eli felt something he hadn't in years. Alive. And in the quiet moments, when the woman looked at him with gratitude she never put into words, Eli realized that maybe, just maybe, letting her stay had been the smartest foolish decision he'd ever made. The sun rose slower than usual that morning, painting the prairie in thick golden streaks that seemed to hang in the air like syrup. Eli stepped outside his cabin, boots crunching against the dry earth, and squinted toward the barn. From a distance, he could already hear the chaos. The twins, awake early as ever, were squealing like a pair of banshees in perfect harmony. The chicken had launched a preemptive strike, clucking angrily at anyone who dared cross its path. And somewhere in the middle of the madness, Eliza was trying her best to keep everyone alive and relatively upright. Eli scratched his jaw. He had expected silence when he first found her in the hay. He had expected the peace of an empty barn, maybe a quiet breakfast with the twins asleep in their blankets. But the world had other plans, and Eli had learned to stop expecting anything anymore. He leaned against the doorframe and took it all in. The twins were climbing on the haystack like little mountain goats, one of them dangling dangerously close to the chicken. That bird, feathers ruffled and eyes sharp, gave a warning cluck, sounding almost military in its intensity. Eli couldn't help but laugh, a loud, hearty laugh that echoed across the barn and startled a few birds in the nearby field. Eliza shot him a glare. That was half amusement, half exasperation. "You're supposed to be helping." "I am helping," he said, still chuckling. "I'm supervising chaos. Somebody's got to maintain order." The twins, apparently inspired by his laughter, erupted into a fresh wave of giggles. The chicken flapped and squawked in disapproval, hopping onto Eli's boot to make a point. He yelped, hopped back, and ended up face to face with Daniel, who grabbed his hat and refused to let go. Eliza sighed, shaking her head. "I swear they're going to ruin that hat." "They already have," Eli admitted. Breakfast became a miniature battlefield. The twins grabbed spoons. The chicken attempted to snatch a piece of bread from Eli's hand, and Eliza was multitasking like a general commanding troops, feeding babies, scolding the chicken, and occasionally shouting at Eli to sit still. By mid-morning, Eli realized he was more exhausted than he'd ever been after a long cattle drive. The twins had perfected their art of coordinated chaos, crawling under tables, pulling at boots, and squealing at precisely the moment he needed quiet. The chicken had commandeered a bucket, rolling it around the barn like it was a prized toy. And Eliza, she had developed a kind of rhythm, bouncing from one disaster to the next, keeping the chaos alive but controlled. Eli sat back, watching. For the first time in years, the sound of life around him felt like music. Harsh, loud, ridiculous music, but music nonetheless. As the day passed, more small disasters occurred. A spilled bucket of water nearly soaked the twins. Clyde, the horse, decided he wanted in on the fun and trotted across the barn floor, slipping slightly on hay, sending the chickens squawking into the rafters. The twins laughed so hard their cheeks were red, and Eliza couldn't help but laugh with them. Even Eli, who prided himself on being unshakable, found himself doubling over with laughter as the chicken dive-bombed him. The twins squealed with joy, and Eliza's laughter echoed above the barn. By evening, the sun had melted into the horizon. The chaos subsided slowly, replaced by the soft hum of tired bodies and content sighs. The twins slept, curled up together in a makeshift bed of hay and blankets. The chicken finally settled, feathers puffed, like a tiny king guarding its subjects. Eliza sat nearby, brushing stray hairs from their faces, humming softly. Eli stood outside, leaning against a post, watching them all. He had never imagined that a barn, a few babies, and a feathered lunatic could feel like home. He thought back to the night he first found her in the hay. Exhausted, hungry, clutching the twins, a chicken perched on her shoulder like a guardian. Angel gone rogue. He had laughed at the absurdity, had wondered if the whole thing was a dream. And now, months later, that absurdity had woven itself into his life like thread into a tapestry. Messy, chaotic, but beautiful. Eli shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Guess life out here ain't ever gonna be quiet again," he murmured. But he didn't mind, not anymore, because in the West life was rough, wild, and unpredictable, and sometimes the most unexpected things, a woman, two tiny humans, a chicken, could turn chaos into laughter, strangers into family, and a simple barn into a home. He tipped his hat, watching the last rays of the sun spill across the plains, and for the first time in a long time, Eli felt at peace. The ranch would never be the same, and he wouldn't have it any other way.